Now, the situation in West Asia remains tense, to say the least. Almost 6 weeks into the war, Israeli strikes have flattened substantial parts of Gaza. And today, we'll take you through the battleground Gaza and the different theaters where the war is unfolding and the impact that it's leaving on ground. The only lifeline that gave some sort of hope to the Palestinians were the hospitals. Al-Shifa Al-Quds, two of the biggest hospitals here. The complete blockade and the Hamas's hiding strategy, as claimed by Israel, it's made matters worse. For days now, hospitals, medical facilities have become the key target of relentless bombardment from Israel. Hamas's health ministry has claimed that all hospitals in north of Gaza are out of service. They're no longer functioning. Medical services can be barely administered in northern Gaza. This includes the two biggest hospitals, as I mentioned earlier, in the Gaza Strip, which have been rendered out of service. The Al-Shifa and the Al-Quds hospital in the Gaza city have suspended operations entirely. The WHO, it managed to speak to health professionals at the Al-Shifa hospital. They described a dire and perilous situation, saying that it was not functioning as a hospital anymore, with constant gunfire and bombing exacerbating the already critical circumstances. The situation in Gaza's largest hospital, it's appalling to say the least. Premature babies who were placed in incubators are now being wrapped in foil, placed next to hot water in a desperate bid to keep them alive. As of now, a total of 7 premature babies, 27 critical patients have died in Al-Shifa hospital, according to the deputy health minister in the Hamas-run Gaza Strip. They fear the death toll among patients will rise in the coming hours. Now, Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry further added that at least 2,300 people are still inside Al-Shifa hospital in an update that was shared by the WHO. A doctor in the region said that the Al-Shifa hospital can no longer accept patients. Ambulances, they've stopped evacuating the wounded Palestinians and bringing them to Al-Shifa. Meanwhile, the staff inside says it's impossible to leave without risking injury or death. Medical workers are warning of rising casualties among patients. According to the UN's humanitarian agency, 20 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are no longer functioning since Israel announced the complete siege of the Strip. According to multiple reports, there's no food, no fuel to run the generators here. Solar energy is being used to power a few of the critical systems. That's not enough. Now moving on to Gaza City, where Gaza's parliament building is located. An image circulating on social media shows troops of the IDF's 13th Battalion, the Golani Brigade, inside the parliament building, raising Israel flag inside the Hamas militant seat of political power after the IDF troops captured this site. This is the visual. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, also said that Hamas has lost control in the Gaza Strip as the Israeli Defense Forces move to fully capture Gaza City. He further added, terrorists are fleeing south, civilians are looting Hamas bases, and they have no confidence in the government. Within hours of Israel's defense minister's announcement, rockets were seen being launched towards Israel from Gaza. Sirens were also heard in central Israel. You can see these visuals. But as seen from Sderot, the missiles were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome. Although, according to the Ashkelon Coast Regional Council, 1 rocket fell in the region. No injuries were reported, but buildings and vehicles were damaged. As rockets were fired into Israel from southern Gaza, hundreds of thousands of refugees are in the midst of a humanitarian crisis that's deepening by the hour, pushing every possible safety net to the brink. People are washing themselves in polluted seawater, sleeping in packed tents, eating what little bread they can find, or on some days, none at all. The people are coming from Gaza's north, fleeing Israel's bombing campaign, some with a few possessions, but most bearing only their children and the clothes on their backs. While at the Rafah crossing, the first group of foreigners and injured Palestinians evacuated after the Rafah border crossing reopened arrived in Egypt from Gaza. According to reports, the groups that entered into Egypt comprised of 7 injured Gaza residents along with more than 80 foreign nationals and their dependents. The border crossing was closed for nearly 2 days since the 10th of November due to issues that were related to transportation of injured Palestinians from northern Gaza. With the border crossing reopening, around 88 trucks arrived in the Gaza Strip from Egypt. With the reopening of Rafah crossing, there are fears of a wider regional conflict in West Asia, as cross-border hostilities between Israeli military and Hezbollah continue to rise. The militant group Hezbollah fired anti-tank missiles towards Israeli troops near the border's western sector. In retaliation, Israel's defense forces carried out airstrikes along with the country's border with Lebanon. There are also reports of a convoy of journalists that came under attack near the Lebanese border. IDF claimed that the targets included terror infrastructure, weapons storage compounds, and an operational command center used by Hezbollah. This is what the situation is on ground currently in Gaza. And to discuss this further, we're now being joined by Irina Sukuman, Middle East analyst and human rights activist, joining us from Washington, D.C. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Ma'am, to begin with, let's talk about the uproar that the operations in Gaza have caused. What options would you say President Joe Biden is considering as protests escalate in the United States, including Chicago, and the Indonesian Prime Minister also, in fact, urging him to take more action, while, of course, emphasizing the need to protect hospitals in Gaza?
Well, President Biden did emphasize that same issue, the need to protect hospitals to Israel. But for now, he has ruled out the possibility of a ceasefire. First, because Israel itself has ruled out that option, and second, it probably would not accomplish all that much at this point. In terms of addressing the uproar, he has had many Zoom calls and other outreach efforts with members of Arab American and Muslim American communities in the United States, discussing the White House strategy to combat Islamophobia that was recently released as planned. Also discussing the humanitarian aid efforts by the United States to deliver humanitarian aid into Gaza. Now, many of these communities have been pushing for a ceasefire, but no one has actually concretely described what outcome they would expect the ceasefire to accomplish. A ceasefire would not restore fuel, electricity, or fix those hospitals. A ceasefire would not return the conditions for the refugees to come back. So the only thing it would actually allow to do is for Hamas to relocate and possibly utilize the humanitarian crossings to make an escape from Gaza. Otherwise, everything that could be done by Israel specifically at this moment is already being done through humanitarian pauses, through evacuation assistance efforts, through warnings to the civilian population, and through air drops by Jordan.
Mr. Kuman, I just want to come in here.
Those options are limited.
Yes, I just want to take your thoughts on this now in the context of diplomacy. You know, how does Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen propose to expand this window of legitimacy? Because this window of legitimacy is something they have been talking about. They are expecting international pressure to come in any time. They plan to expand that window. How do you propose he would sort of expect to expand that?
The only issue that Israel can actually bring up is engage with the international community in a dialogue about options for Gaza, for separately for long-term governance issue, which needs to be discussed regardless of pressure. This is just a practical step that needs to be considered at early, at middle, and at later stages of the war. But the second issue is also humanitarian management, because so far we are hearing a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of calls for ceasefire to end the war, but no practical solution to handling these humanitarian concerns, while also allowing Israel to do what it needs to do to restore deterrence, which is to destroy the military hold by Hamas in Gaza completely. I think one reason why this has not happened already and is very unlikely to happen in the near future, because no one is willing to concede that in order to work with Israel on this issue, in order to solve this problem and to provide the assistance that Gaza residents need, they would need to apply pressure on Hamas and not only on Israel to stop preventing civilians from being able to leave, to evacuate to safety, from withholding fuel, from withholding humanitarian aid, and from using terror to impose humanitarian needs. And Hamas is a terrorist organization. It does not listen to diplomacy. It can only listen to pressure, which means cutting off humanitarian aid that goes to Gaza NGOs and to foreign accounts.
Ms. Sukuman, in fact, I was just going to come to this, speaking of options for Gaza and deterrence, and just for better understanding, you've mostly covered these points. As we see Israeli forces continue with their unrelenting strikes and operations, the scale of destruction, the civilian death toll, it's mounting exponentially. To what extent can Israel justify its operations, especially when lives of infants, critical patients are at stake? Now, my question here is evacuating these already overwhelmed hospitals the only way for Israel in its hunt for Hamas militants, or do you think at this point they need to consider other options as well to carry out their operations?
There are no real other options. The only option is if the international community assists in evacuating those hospitals, which should have been and was possible to do weeks ago, because Israel made no secret of the fact that these hospitals are being used by Hamas for storing weapons and so forth. Secretary Blinken made public testimony about it. The European Union has expressed concern about this as well quite publicly. So at every step of the way, the international community has balked at taking action to prevent these disasters from happening, then reacts by pressuring Israel when it's already too late to do anything, and when already they are at the door, when it's no longer possible to evacuate those hospitals. And the question is, why this double standard? Why not utilize opportunities before they come to a point of no return? The question is, the issue is, a lot of these concerns are crocodile tears on the part of the international community. They're not willing to provide safe haven for Gaza civilians. They have not been willing to even offer an evacuation of infants and very young minors on a sort of kinder transport to Europe, the United States, or elsewhere.
All right. Well, Ms. Sukuman, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA with your insights on this.
Thank you so much.